Welcome everybody to Dan Has Fun with me, Daniel. Not got my face on the screen this time around just because the game we're going to be playing, Europa Universalis 4, has a lot going on visually, so I can always add the face in for later episodes if you guys feel so inclined, but for now, we're going to leave it as basic on screen as we can. If you are looking for a strategy game, by the way, and you are really unsure of what to play, this is one I would certainly recommend. It feels like it's right in the sweet spot, at least for me, where it's difficult enough where you can really get your teeth into it, but at the same time it's not a game that's so difficult that it just makes you feel like an idiot when you can't do things properly. Honestly, for the first episode, you're probably not really going to see any gameplay. The timer is still likely going to stay as November the 11th, 1444. So if you do want to skip this episode, I totally understand. But if you are either new to this type of game, new to the game completely, maybe not an expert in the genre, I'm going to give a quick run through of kind of what happens. And then after that, for subsequent videos, I'll probably do a little bit of explaining as we go, but it won't be a dedicated tutorial or anything like that. If there's ever demand for something like that, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm sure there are many, many players of this game that are a lot better than me at it, but I find this a very peaceful game to play. So, I did skip the select and the country you're playing as screen, just because I want to at least skip that bit, because we can talk about the title page for probably 20 minutes, so we'll do that another day. We're going to play as this very tiny province of Bologna, and also as a heads up, don't expect anything to get pronounced very well. I'm sure I'm going to butcher many, many names of places and people alike. That's just part of the experience on this channel. But we start as Bologna, which is a one province minor. You only have one little region, it's one province, it's landlocked, it's going to be a pretty tricky start. But let's go over what all of this means, because there's a lot on screen right now, and I'm sure, like I said, for most people who have either not played this game before, or maybe just seen it, glancing, there's a lot to unpack. So we'll go over the UI that you can see on the screen at the moment first. That's our flag. It's a nice easy way of getting to our main screen, but we'll talk about that later. How much money we have, and how much we're making or losing per turn. We're making just over one gold every month, so not a terrible start for a one province minor. Our manpower, so how many people in our population we can turn into military troops. How many sailors we have. We're landlocked, so the answer to that is 0. We don't have any. Our stability, so how resilient our nation is to unrest and things like that, starts at 0. How corrupt our nation is, again, starts at 0. More corruption makes everything more expensive. How much prestige we have, we start slightly above 0, but it will naturally kind of gravitate towards 0, hence you'll see it's actually a minus every year that it's going to get. Prestige has a lot of very, very positive effects. If you have some, it actually makes your armies fight more effectively with more morale, and you can deal with trade more efficiently as well. There's a lot of other things, but they're the two that usually come to mind. We're a republic, so we don't have a king or a doge or anything like that, a sultan. So we're a republic, so we have something called republican tradition. The more tradition we have, the better, really. There are some pretty nasty consequences for a republic to have low republican tradition. We'll go over it over time, because it will invariably happen at some point. And then our last number up here, at least in the main section, is our power projection. We'll talk about that more down the line as we get into fights and wars with different nations. We have 2 merchants, and one of them's not doing anything right now. We have no colonists, because we're not a colonizing nation. That's not a thing for us yet. We have 2 diplomats to either, sow the seeds for future wars, or just to snuggle up to different nations. And we have a missionary available in case we wanted to convert any province to a different religion. We're not going to have to worry about that for a while. Other things across the top, obviously the name of our nation, Bologna. how many administrative points we have, how many diplomatic points we have, how many military points we have. They're used for a lot of things. For, for example, improving our technology, or maybe using military power to help prevent a rebellion before it happens, things like that. We'll go into that more, like I said, naturally over time. We're in the Age of Discovery. There are 4 ages in this game. We don't need to talk about that until we get the option to, get a benefit out of it. Just so you know what it is. Obviously, date, game speed, and if it's paused or not. What our score is. Our score is going to be 0 for a long, long time as a 1 province minor. Then we have, what our diplomats are doing, which is nothing. What our merchants are doing, and our army, how big it is, and we can find where it is as well. Obviously for us, 1 province minor, it's only one place it's going to be, and it's in our 1 province. Down here we're going to be able to see some, and we can tailor this as much as we like. I don't use this window very often, but it shows different diplomatic events potentially between different nations. You can customize it, but I don't usually pay too much attention to it. And then we have a heck of a lot of filters. This game, it's a map-based game, right? So there are a lot of filters involved. So we can see what the terrain looks like, the political one, which is the one, frankly, I'm going to be using 99% of the time. You can see different trades, trade nodes, what our diplomatic relations to the rest of the world is, which right now everything's going to be grey because we don't have any with anybody. What religion they are. So we're, in an area that's almost exclusively Catholic. Although, interestingly, there is a bit of a Hussite religion in Bohemia. What our institutions are, we'll get into that later. Our development, so how wealthy our provinces are. Ours is, well, kind of mid-yellow, so it's a pretty average province. Like I said, this is going to be a pretty tricky start. Coalitions in case, people are very, very aggressive and they end up being group attacked. Autonomy, so how much control you have directly over it, or how much, you're delegating. And the culture group. This will come up very, very much so when we're going into trying to capture more land, because it's a lot easier to deal with people in the same culture group as you. So that's everything that's important here. There are a lot more filters, but they're the important ones for us to consider right now. We then have down here, we're part of the Holy Roman Empire. There are some events unique to it. We'll deal with that later, or probably not, given where we are, but we'll see. We then have the papacy section, because we are Catholic, so we do have some options unique to our religion. We don't need to worry about the menus and the ledgers down here. We'll just show them as they come over time. Honestly, the only thing I really use down here is the ledger, because you can see, just as an example, graphs and information for everything. There's no wars at the moment. This is the most common one I'm looking at. See who's at war with who. And then, obviously, nothing on the bottom left. That was a lot of talking just about the interface. So, I think I'll try to compact that in. Let's talk a bit more about our nation in particular, though. Now that we've at least gone over the the very basics of what you're looking at. We'll cover these afterwards. So, our nation is 1 province. Here is the province. It is a grassland, which is good and bad. It's pretty cheap to build things on a grassland. There's no penalty or bonus, actually, so it's pretty neutral. That's a good thing. There's a lot more locations that have a penalty than a bonus, let me tell you. We get 1 extra building slot, which is nice. You get more building slots depending on how much development a province has. Ours has a total of 12, which is okay, but really not setting the world on fire. But let's go through some of our actual windows. So let's go from left to right. This is our leader. So yes, we are a republic, so we don't have a king, but we still have a person that kind of governs on behalf. So we do actually have a doge, but they don't have any more power realistically than anybody else. But their stats do dictate partly how much in the way of admin, diplo, and military power we have. So he has 3 skill in admin and 2 in diplo and military. This is a pretty average leader. The maximum a person can have is 6 in any stat. So if you have 6s across the board, you are the best the game can possibly make. Obviously, if you have 0s across the board, you are the very, very worst. So we're honestly, as long as somebody has at least a total of 6 between the 3 stats, they're okay. This one has 7. He also has a trait. He's secretive, so we're more likely to catch people spying on us. Not massively important. It is pretty cool, though, that the AI, they will react differently and they will play differently depending on what traits they have. So an AI ruler with secretive will prefer to use something called a condottieri, which is like hiring troops from a different nation. There are other ones where like the AI will be far less inclined to attack at all. Some will be more inclined to attack, but only on very one-sided wars. Some will like to ask for loans. There's a lot of variety. It's pretty cool. But because we are not a monarchy, we have to go for another election. Although, interestingly, we only have to do our elections every 12 years. We'll talk more about whether that's a good or a bad thing later. But yes, for now, we're getting 6 points in admin a turn, 5 in Diplo, and 5 in military. You always get a base of 3 no matter what across the board. That's why these are all 3 higher than what our leader has. You can hire advisors that will increase these numbers, but the very cheapest one, just to show you, is going to start at 1 gold per month, and we're only making, what, like 1.11? So that would pretty much blow our entire budget. So we're probably not going to do that straight away. But they can come with their own unique traits. So for example, this one makes trade more efficient. This one increases something called Diplo reputation. There are some really good ones to get in there, but we're not going to worry about it right now. You can also focus on one of these. So let's say I want admin to get higher quicker. We can click this button, it'll sap 1 point out of the other 2 categories and give it to that one. We're not going to do that right now either, but it's something to think about. Also, our leader or representative can definitely die. This one's only 29, but obviously as they get older, they're increasing their chance of dying. So we are going to see in 12 years' time, given they'll be 41, is it worth keeping them? We'll talk about that in 12 years' time. 12 game years, anyway. Next tab, Government tab. Tells us we're a republic. We're going to be able to reform our republic over time. We'll talk about that the first time we're able to do it. We then have our culture, our Romagnol culture group, part of the Italian group. So if we end up with another province that doesn't have that culture, we'll get a penalty. But how much of a penalty depends how different it is to us. We don't need to worry about strengthening the government right now because we already have maximum tradition. But you can spend military points to do that, which is helpful in situations sometimes. We can also promote a couple of cultures, but we'll deal with that when it comes up. Diplomatically, 3 nations have already rivaled us. When you rival a nation, you can embargo them without a penalty. You actually get power projection to do so. If you take provinces off them or insult them or things like that, you increase your power projection, which is great. Power projection leads to some pretty helpful stats. If you can get to 50, you actually get a bonus in every point total every month by 1. So you get 1 more admin, 1 more Diplo, 1 more military, which is fantastic. Honestly, given it's Ferrara, which is adjacent to us, Mantua, which is not adjacent to us, is also a 1 province minor, and Lucca, which is also a 1 province minor, we're probably just going to rival them back. We could rival Florence, but that's a dangerous thing to do, potentially. I'm just going to open up these windows while I'm at it, because they are the biggest nation adjacent to us, and I don't really want to get eaten by them. Does anybody, and I'm going to skip a menu for a second, does anybody want to ally us off the bat? No. So we're going to have a fun time. So, honestly, rivaling the 3 of them back is absolutely fine. So that was Ferrara. Next up is Mantua. And then last but not least, Lucca. There we go. There are other things on the screen. Obviously, it shows us our relationship with other nations. You never really have to look too much in this window, honestly. But it shows us how many relations we have. We can hold up to 4 different relations at a time without a penalty. What our diplomatic reputation is, the higher it is, the more people like you, so naturally the more they will kind of gravitate towards agreeing with what you want to do. Ours is flat 0 right now. And then there's an improved relations. So the higher this is, the easier it is to improve relations, and the faster it is to get rid of poor relations. none of that's really going to matter too much right now. We're hopefully not going to have to deal with revanchism, because that means we've lost if we're dealing with it. And then, yeah, just shorthand, so our stability, prestige, number of ideas, which we'll deal with not for a while, honestly. Score, it's just a shorthand of what we have up top. But it also shows us we have 5,000 troops, and we have 9,000 manpower. I know it shows it up here, but this isn't... You're going to be able to see, for example, if I click on Austria, you can see it for them just at one single button click. So that can be pretty helpful. There are other things, but I'm going to skip over some of the really minor pieces. Going to go to the economy tab. Shows us how we're making our money, how we're losing money, and what our net balance is. You'll actually notice it's different. This is the one really that I like to watch. But we'll talk more about how we're going to deal with money after we talk about the UI completed. How much trade we're making, and where we can send our merchants. I honestly don't do this for merchants, I just do it straight from the panel over here. Technology. We all start at tech level 3 in Europe. Certain other regions of the world start significantly lower, at 2 or 1. But everybody in Europe starts at 3 across the board. We also have an option for institutions, but institution hasn't occurred. We'll talk about that probably in the next 6 or 7 game years, because you tend to get an institution pretty early to spawn. They spawn every 50 years. Idea groups, they're attached to our technology. We don't have the tech to do it yet. We can see what Bologna is all about, though. So our tradition, so by default, we get 10% cheaper buildings, and our forts are 20% better at defending as a fort. So effectively what that means is that if somebody tries to siege you, it's going to take them 20% longer to do it. Every nation of any substance gets slightly different ones. The game does bulk a few kind of irrelevant nations together with the same type of ideas, but they're few and far between, which is nice. But we have some pretty interesting ones. We'll talk about it more when we get options to unlock them. We have our own mission tree. Honestly, Bologna's is pretty generic. Everything other than the left-hand side column is generic to every nation. Every nation that doesn't have an actual mission tree of their own gets all 4 of these columns. We get something slightly different because we're in the Italian region. We'll talk about them more as they come up. Here are some national decisions we get to make later. Can't do any of them yet, and we can actually enact policies later as well. We'll talk about those when we have idea groups that can make it happen. War exhaustion, the more it goes up, the worse the unrest in your nation becomes. Stability, which we'll be trying to deal with pretty early on. Our governing capacity, so this is how much we can actually maintain ourselves as a nation. We'll talk more about it when we get close to the limit. Overextension is when you take other provinces from other nations. If you take too much at once, you become incredibly unstable. We're not going to have to deal with expansion, but our unrest is by default -2, which is good. It means our provinces have 2 less unrest than the default because we're a republic with maximum tradition. And we don't have any rebels as a result. Religion, we're Catholic. Everybody around us is Catholic. You have to go all the way to the Ottomans before you see anything different. As a Catholic, you get more tolerance of your own religion, so you just more stability. You are able to convert heathens more efficiently. Not heretics, heathens, so not, say, Protestants or Orthodox, but you would be able to convert, say, Sunni Muslims more efficiently. So that's helpful, but not immediately. And then our religious unity. Religious unity will fall off a cliff at some point in the future, not for a while, but you're going to see the fun that happens when that comes up. Our military, all of our military stats and which units we're using, we're not going to go over in huge detail right now because we can't change anything. And the one thing I do want to go over in some more detail, the estates. So we have factions within our nation that are trying to vow for some power and control. The clergy, the nobility, and the burghers. Burghers? Burghers. I don't know, I'm going to say burghers. Merchants, effectively. They have a default level of happiness. We're going to take advantage and we're going to see some land off them straight away. As long as their happiness stays at 30% or higher, things are good. Less than 30, things can get pretty spicy. But we do want to start accumulating more land and slowly stripping it away. It'll be helpful for the future. Because we are Bologna, we start by default having this papal emissary perk turned on. What it means kind of practically for us is it means everything that costs military, diplomatic or admin power costs a little bit more to do, but you get more yearly papal influence and the clergy like you for it. So I'm not going to get rid of it right now, but it's pros and cons. What we do want to do, and there's one trait in here, let's see if we can find it. Oversight by the clergy. All it does, it doesn't have any modifiers other than it makes their loyalty equilibrium higher. So their default number now is up to 53.4%. We want to try and get them all so their default equilibrium is 50 or higher, because then we can keep stripping land off them over time and they will never get below 30, so they'll never rebel. So that is very, very helpful. Clerical ministers is also pretty good. It does give the clergy 10% more influence though, so you do have to be careful. But it just means missionaries are cheaper when you use them. We're not going to do it yet, but it's interesting. I don't think the clergy has anything else I really want to do right now. We don't need religious culture, so that's fine. We don't need religious diplomats, although both of them do increase the the equilibrium, like we mentioned before. But I don't need any of that right now. And we're definitely not doing expansionist zealotry because everybody around us is Catholic, so that's just a penalty right now. Nobility. They will have the right of council. It's pretty much the same thing, but for them instead of the clergy. We give them a little bit more influence. In return, their default loyalty goes up. It's still only at 43 though, so we want to try and keep going, see what else we can get. I am going to think about command of the military, because if you put this on, we have to give them land. And it gives them 30% influence. And if you recruit a general, it gives them even more influence. So it's very easy to put on command of the military and then end up with the military the nobility trying to take over the country, which is not so good. You don't want that to happen. Supremacy over the council is also interesting. It would bump their loyalty above 50, but then they can pursue an agenda at any time. So they can throw a message to you and say, hey, we demand you do X. And you can choose to not do it, but there are consequences, as you can imagine. So it can be a bit dangerous. So I'm probably not going to do that quite yet. Aristocratic councillors is okay, but it makes stability more expensive, so I'm not enamored with it. Honestly, for now, I'm going to leave their loyalty below 50 as a default, and then we're just going to see if we get events to increase it. The burghers. They also have the equivalent of just getting loyalty in return for some influence. We're going to do that. Their default is at what? 52.9, so we don't have to pander anymore to them. Having said that, control over monetary policy is very interesting. It would stack with the clergy though, so it would be making our stuff 10% more expensive for everything. But you'll get more production efficiency, which means, workshops are going to be more effective. You get influenza, that's not what I was going to say. Inflation reduction, which means if you take out a loan or you get money off another nation, the inflation that occurs to that naturally fixes itself. And interest is lower, so if you have to take out a loan, they're less expensive. Not going to do that right now, but sometimes I do go for that. You can even get loans with these guys if you want to, but I don't like to do it because you lose mercantilism, which is just trading efficiency in essence. The other one that sometimes I do is patronage of the arts. You're sacrificing a little bit of money every month for your prestige to go up. You also get 15 prestige immediately by doing it, and it increases their loyalty default. So if you're touch and go around 50, that's actually a pretty good option, but we're not going to do any of those right now. They are all the main screens. What we're going to do just before we wrap up this episode is we have an army force limit of 7. We're going to build to it, so I've got 2 more infantry on its way. We're going to recruit a leader. costs us 50 military points. Because of the fact that we don't have any bonuses towards general generation right now, they can have what's been called 2 to 7 pips. Let's recruit one. I'm going to show you what happens. We're just going to leave the name default. It's going to be Gabriele Lambertini. We got 1% army professionalism. We'll talk about that more in the future. Actually, this guy is nearly as good as it could have been. It was between 2 and 7, and we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pips. 6 pips is pretty good. Let's explain what they mean, just before we wrap up. So we know he's a male general. Most nations can only have male generals, but not all of them. Then we have fire, shock, maneuver, and siege. Fire is not very helpful early game, I'll be honest, because most people don't have guns. So, not that helpful. Shock is more helpful early game, especially with cavalry units, because, well, they're running straight at the enemy, right? So, at least we have a point. Every point just means you have more bonus towards it. Maneuver does a few things. So, if, let's say, you attack another army and you're having to attack them across a river, by default, you would actually get a combat penalty, which you'd expect because you're attacking over the river. But if you have more maneuver than them, you don't get that penalty, because you're effectively just out-positioning them. It also does other things. It makes you, I believe, slightly quicker at moving. It means you actually take less attrition if you're in foreign land. It's a very versatile trait. It's just, usually that's the stat that I will sacrifice if I'm looking for a really good general. I would much rather have higher shock and then fire later in the game than I would high maneuverability. Maneuverability for your naval admiral is actually pretty useful, but for generals it's okay, it's not great. And then siege, which is very, very helpful in the extreme early game before we even have the ability to have cannons, because it just means this general is pretty good at sieging, and he'll be good at sieging even though we're just going to be sitting outside a city with several thousand men and nothing else. We're going to talk about sieging and kind of practically how that comes up when we end up in a fight. So we're good there. Only the things we're going to want to do before we really forget is we want to assign this merchant. So we are in this green zone just by the skin of our teeth. So we are in the Venice trade node, and you'll notice our one merchant is in Venice trying to collect money. That's how we're making our money. We're trying to get money pulled into our trade node, and then we're going to try and grab as much of it as we possibly can. You'll notice there's a big set of arrows across the world, so we can see which trade nodes are sending money from one to the other. Some trade nodes do not send money anywhere at all. So if we look at the English Channel up here in orange, all the arrows go in, nothing goes out at all. So that is a very good trade node, as you imagine. There are others that are going to have a lot of trades going out. So if we look at Alexandria down here, yes, it has a couple of arrows coming in as 3, but it also has 3 arrows going out. So ideally you want to be at the end, and actually being in Venice, we are one of those. Nothing goes from Venice. Our problem really is we only have 3% of the trade node's power because we're a tiny one province minor, and we're, you know, in the same trade node as Venice. So yeah, we're not going to be able to compete with them right now. So we still have to decide where we're going to put this other merchant. Realistically, we're just going to put it somewhere and try and push more money towards us. So we're going to put it next door in Ragusa and say we're going to transfer trade power. So what will happen is we'll start pushing more of this trade through towards Venice. I just wanted to do that so we didn't forget. And I don't know who we're going to ally with immediately. We don't have to worry too much because we're in the Holy Roman Empire, and we'll talk more about that organically as the practical implications of that come up. But unlike if we started on the other end of the world, being one province minor is pretty much just a death sentence immediately. We're not going to die immediately, probably. It's still possible. But realistically, who are we going to potentially be able to ally with? We need to we really want to try and ally at least one fairly big nation. but they're not going to be very inclined because, well, we're a wimpy pile of rubbish. Why would they, right? Bohemia is probably going to be the most inclined of the reasonably large nations. France isn't going to do it. You never really want to ally England. It's a very dangerous alliance to make. Castile are going to be more likely to try and attack us later on than they are trying to help us. The Pope is an interesting option, but they're probably going to hate us as well. There's no chance of getting the Ottomans for the wrong religion. And Venice absolutely hate us. Like, they are hostile towards us, and they will probably be like that forever. So they're just not a thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to try, first of all, we're going to try and increase our relations with Bohemia. And then the other thing we're going to try and do is... And now, we're probably going to ally, if we can, the Pope. The Pope are bigger than they look. They start with 4 provinces, but the 2 next door to them are their vassals. So they effectively are 6 provinces. And as tempting at a glance as it would be to try and get with Naples, Naples actually don't run their own policies. Naples is a junior partner of Aragon. So some interesting events can fall to them. Sometimes they'll just get eaten, sometimes they'll be independent, but they almost always are at war, almost all the time. So they're not a reliable pick. So we are going to try and improve relations with the Pope. The one major downside of being a republic is we can't offer to do a royal marriage with anybody, which is a really good way in the Catholic world of boosting relations. We don't have that option on the table. So we have to just be nice and send letters saying we like the people around. We can't just, say, here's my kid, enjoy. So, yeah, we don't have that option. But yes, we're going to hit the play button next episode. That was a nice summary. I might even put this in as episode 0, just so we have it, like I said, the setup episode. But please do get involved if you are, going to watch this. I hope you do. I am not a pro at this by any stretch. I want to hear stories about gameplay you might have had in the past. What's the funniest thing you've had? What's the worst that's gone on? I like to hear all that stuff because there are some hilarious stories that can happen in this game. So yeah, just because it is going to be the first episode of a series, even more than normal, if you could please give it a like, I'd appreciate it. Hopefully you have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the video.